Grand closing, baby. I don't want your money. I want your pride. And I was like, oh. Shout out, Desmond. I don't want your money. I want your pride. All right, you guys ready? All right. Enough foreplay. Turn off. Okay, here we go. So, this stream is going to be directed to educating people with the knowledge that I've amassed over the last week or two about NOBD. It's going to be structured in a way that I hope is easy to digest and everyone understands what it does. Yes, I went into Excel spreadsheets. So you can see the title of the spreadsheet is NOBD explanation for dummies like me. So I am also a dummy. We are going to learn this together. So in order to understand NOBD, we first need to understand the way inputs are handled in consoles and in PCs. Okay. So let's start with Dreamcast. Excuse me. Dreamcast. When you press your input on Dreamcast, so you press a button on the controller, what happens is that is sent to the Dreamcast and is registered in this 16.67 millisecond window. That is the duration of one frame. So Dreamcast looks at everything in this block and reads it one time. Every frame is one reading, right? So if you were to input your dash in this window, you will get your dash. We are going to ignore frame boundaries for now. We're going to get deep into that later, right? PC handles inputs differently than Dreamcast. And this is due to USB polling rates and PCBs that are very, very fast. So what happens now is when you press your input, you'll notice that I bifurcated this frame into 16 sections, right? You can see it here. What happens is because the PCB is being read so often, it has to deliver information into this frame into blocks. So every block, you will have something in there. So you might have a light punch here, right? Or you might have a heavy punch here. So then what happens is the game logic still occurs. So it looks at everything in these blocks, tallies them up, and says, okay, I see that the player pressed light punch. I see that he pressed heavy punch. He meant to dash. Give him a dash, right? So again, regardless of the splitting of this window, the game logic still groups it into one frame. Are we all clear there? Are we all following along? Yes? No? Any questions? This is very important. No questions? Okay. I'm going to move on. Okay. The core issue that NOBD addresses, okay? Since input information is sent per packet on PC, with a higher polling PCB, there is a chance that your input might fall into frame boundary issues. Little typo there is going to piss me off. Okay, and I will explain frame boundary issues in a second. To my limited knowledge, and again, this is my own research. I have done my research on this topic. To my own knowledge, this happens nearly 0 or a very minuscule percentage offline. Because again, right, offline, it's looking at the game this way. It's looking at it in blocks and then grouping it into one frame. However, the issue seems to be more pronounced during online play. I don't know why I didn't finish. During online play, mainly due to rollback. So rollback introduces a unique variable into this equation where it's constantly fighting to read inputs. So because the USB is polling so quickly, it struggles to tell whether you press the light punch over here. Let's just do here. All right, I'm going to delete this one. Actually, you know what? We'll do this. It struggles to tell. So you hit a light punch here. It's going to struggle to tell whether you hit your heavy punch here or your heavy punch here. This section is the part that fucks everything up. You see that little red block, the frame boundary? That's what fucks everything up. Okay? So, let us explain what is the frame boundary issue. Your inputs are exposed to frame boundaries if your finger gap is wide during a simultaneous press. So, just some context on simultaneous presses, right? When you are using two buttons to dash, you may think it may feel like you're pressing them together, but you're not. It's humanly impossible to press them together. What's happening is you press one first, and there's a slight delay, a couple of milliseconds, and you press the other button. So naturally, there is a gap between those two presses. But the game is smart enough to know that you meant a simultaneous press. Are we following along? Are we good? Nikai? Yes? No? Yeah? Okay, cool. All right. So here is the frame boundary issue. So light punch is pressed in this green section. So if you were to count, it would be pressed on the 15th frame. I mean, the 15th millisecond of the first frame, because a frame is 16.67 long, right? So you're pressing it towards the end of this frame. And then because of the 4 millisecond finger gap, your heavy punch is occurring on the second frame. You see this? Second frame. So what's happening now is the game says, okay, I see light punch on one frame because it's reading your inputs here, right? And then it starts reading the new frame. And then it says, oh, I see heavy punch here. So it's not counting this as a dash. What's going to happen is the first button you press comes out. So this results in a missed dash. So how does a 4 millisecond finger gap operate if you get a successful dash? It'll look like this. You'll probably hit it mid-frame with your light punch. 4 milliseconds later, heavy punch is pressed. You're still within the frame boundary because this is still one frame. You will get a dash. That's pretty simple, right? You guys are following that? Good? Okay. Here is some points that I wanted to make. Key point. Hang on. OCD kicking in. Frame boundaries existed in every console to date. Game logic groups your inputs into one frame blocks, so this issue does not happen often, but it is more frequent on PC and more pronounced during online. Like this is what we said. So I want to make that a point that this polling rate issue is more prominent online than it is offline. To my knowledge, it is almost zero or very minuscule that polling rates have anything to do with you missing shit offline. Okay? And we are going to address why NOBD, after you install it, makes you have better execution offline. Don't worry, we're coming to that. All right? So, what is the solution for this quote unquote problem that's being presented, right? NOBD says, let's create a dynamic window once a button is pressed that the player controls 3 milliseconds, 5 milliseconds, 7. This is the window that you can select, right? That waits for the amount of time to register a second press. So for your simultaneous press, it's you're pressing light punch, a window opens up in the game that you can't see obviously, and it says, okay, I'm gonna wait 5 ms to see if you press is fierce. And if you press within that 5 ms, it groups the input together. Now, again, this is happening before it is being sent to the console to be read. This is all happening internally in your controller. So it's grouping your input and sending it to be read, right? This means your dash will always come out if you are within the dynamic window timer that you set. Do you guys understand what NOBD is doing? I'm not going to re-explain. You're going to have to catch the VOD. Do we understand what NOBD is doing, or do we need further clarification? Yes? Okay. Cool. What this means, inputs getting split by frame boundaries is an afterthought, as long as you are within your dynamic window. If your input gets split by a frame boundary, NOBD sends a grouped input during the latest frame window that is active once the input is read. At the very worst, you will have a 1 frame delay dash, but you will dash. So let me just show you what I mean by that, right? So let's say in this example where you would miss a dash, right? So you press here on the 15th millisecond of this frame, right? NOBD does not send anything until 5 ms is completed. So it waits, and then it'll see your fierce punch. Then once it sees that, it says, oh, grouped input, let's send it for reading. So instead of coming out on the first frame where you pressed, a slight delay happens and it sends the group input to the second frame. So your dash comes out, but it comes out 1 frame later. Understood? Would that dash be missed on Dreamcast? Yes, it would. Yes. If you are not using NOBD, this dash will be missed on Dreamcast because of the frame boundary. Okay? Let's keep going. Okay. Question. Does it fix the USB polling issue? Yes, it does. If it took 6 milliseconds, then do you get light punch? So Rob, it depends. So is that question geared to me having NOBD or not having NOBD? With NOBD, so it depends on the window that you set, that dynamic window that I spoke about, 3 milliseconds, 5 milliseconds, 7. So let's say you have it set to 7 ms. Because you're pressing within 6, it will give you a dash. If you have it set to 5 ms, because you are later than 5, it will not give you a dash. Does that make sense? Does that clarify? No, Rob, it depends on the window. It depends on the dynamic window, right? So for this example, let's just say that you have a 5 millisecond dynamic window, right? So, right. So with 5 ms, yes, you will get light punch if your gap was 6 milliseconds. Yes, you will get a light punch or whatever button you pressed first, right? It just won't be a dash. So when you use NOBD, what you're doing is essentially setting your own terms on how long you have for a simultaneous press. That's why it suggests to you based on your inputs when it reads your stuff what window you should use. It'll look and say, oh, you have a 4 millisecond window gap. Let's give you an extra millisecond to account for error. And I recommend that you go to 5. Yes, you set the window. NOBD lets you set the window for your simultaneous press. Okay? Everyone understand? Okay. So, does it fix the USB polling issue? Yes. By forcing the game to adhere to the dynamic window during simultaneous presses, the issue of split inputs due to polling, it no longer exists. Okay? So, your inputs getting split never happens with NOBD because as long as you're in that window that you set, the 3ms, 5ms, instead of seeing one press, two presses, right? If you do it within your window, it's going to automatically read it as one press. And it's going to send it to the console as one press. So there is no room for error for you to get a split input between frame boundaries. Okay? Let's talk about the unintended consequences of this quote unquote fix, right? Frame boundaries no longer play a role in simultaneous button presses. This is why NOBD creates a feeling of execution above any system you have ever played on. We have always adhered to frame boundaries in the past. This solution negates them, which creates unnatural windows of high execution, i.e., me ramming to 955. Okay. The flattening of the execution curve is another unintended consequence. This is a bit more involved, but essentially you having tighter execution due to practice no longer matters with NOBD due to how it handles grouping. So in this example, we'll say player 1 has a 2 millisecond finger gap. Player 2 has a 4 millisecond finger gap, right? Now let's look at the scenarios below. 2 millisecond finger gaps. Is there an ad playing? Because I don't want to keep going if there's the ad. It shows me that there's an ad. I'll wait. Okay, ads are done, right? Ads are done. Rob, you back? Okay, we'll just continue, right? So again, an unintended consequence is the flattening of the execution curve. This is more involved, but you having tighter execution due to practice no longer matters with NOBD due to grouping. So let's look at this graph below, right? So the first one is player 1 with a 2 millisecond finger gap, right? So we'll look at how that is sent during a frame. So you'll see that if you start, let's just say on frame 2, if you have a 2 millisecond finger gap, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 tries pretty much before you hit the frame boundary and you miss your dash. And again, the frame boundary exists on every console. Every console, there's frame boundaries, right? If you have a 4 millisecond finger gap, you have 1, 2, 3 chances before you fail. So player 1 without NOBD is mathematically more likely to hit more dashes than player 2 because his execution is tighter. Do you understand that? Is that clear? Okay. So what this means is it's pretty much just going to be reiterating what I said. Player 1 having a smaller finger gap has a lower mathematical probability to miss their dash, since the room to be interrupted by frame boundaries are less compared to player 2. Frame boundaries created a natural barrier to execution that forced the best of the best to tighten their execution, resulting in elite execution. This is why you had your Chaoses, your Yipes, your Chris Schmidt. This is the reason why elite execution exists, because we were forced to tighten up to avoid this. These little red blocks. We had to tighten it up. What NOBD does, it flattens the curve. No longer will the 2 millisecond player have an advantage over the 4 millisecond player. Since the window is dynamic, the game recognizes both scenarios as a dash regardless of frame boundaries, since they are grouped together at the input level. Do you guys get that? So, no matter what, if you are within the dynamic window, you having tighter execution than player 2 no longer means anything. It means the playing field is leveled. Okay? So here's my takeaways. And again, this is not for me to promote or demote NOBD. You guys can make your own assumptions and your own conclusions. If you are pro NOBD, you support, this is in my opinion, right? You support flattening the execution curve, enabling everyone to have the same execution in regards to simultaneous presses. If pro NOBD, you support bypassing frame boundaries set by every console made in the past and also consoles in present day, right? If you are anti-OBD, you do not support the flattening of the execution curve and leave elite execution to a select few. If you are anti-NOBD, you do not support the bypassing of frame boundaries that has guided the game and competitive scene since its inception. So this is what I mean when I say, if we are going the NOBD route, this is something new. This is not what we're used to. This is definitely I don't want to say free for all, but it's a lighter environment compared to when we played the game in its prime or even in the filler arc. It is a different landscape. All right. So with that, that concludes my little presentation on NOBD. I hope that it was informative. I hope that people can understand what this actually does and not spout nonsense about NOBD not letting I'm not letting inputs get eaten up, or NOBD giving you a bigger window for a dash, because it doesn't. It's the way that the window is handled is what NOBD is addressing, right? So all of my crusade against this thing is mainly because of all of the misinformation being spread around regarding this. Also, the fact that people are peddling this shit like crack on the street and not understanding what it does. They're just like, hey man, try this. It's gonna make you godlike. It's gonna make you not miss dashes. Explain to me why. What is it doing? That's all I'm saying. Have the facts before you go around calling people dumb, stupid, ignorant because they don't agree with you. Be informed, make your own decisions, and do your own research. That's how you should approach many topics in your life, in my opinion. So when I see people saying they're old, they're ignorant, they're stubborn, and these guys refuse to read a fucking book, I can't take them seriously. Anyways, I'm out of here. You guys have a good one. I will publish this and highlight this, maybe even upload it to YouTube. I don't know yet. But I'll see you guys on the next one. And I will be in the chat for Step It Up Tuesday. You have a good one. Peace.